This is Infants on Thrones, the philosophies of men mingled with humor. We are the Quorum.
Welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Ostland, and this is part 4 of our series on a manual for creating atheists. Now, as it stands right now, I expect that there will be a part 5 of this series where we look at a street epistemologist YouTube video featuring a treatment that's being applied to Mormon missionaries. Now, we're actually going to be recording that discussion tonight, which is Sunday, September 23rd at 10 p.m. Eastern. Patreon supporters are able to sit in and participate as well if they'd like, so check the details on our Patreon page if you're interested. And there will probably be an eventual part 6 of this series as well, where I talk with one or two of these YouTube street epistemologists and we wrap up this series. But today, we're going to talk about relativism, which is really what kicked this series off in the first place.
Hey, infants. As I listen to recent episodes of your podcast, I get the impression that many of you have become relativists. This type of thinking seems, at least to me, to be voiced often lately, though I may just be reaching because this has been a topic often on my mind in the recent weeks. I've read A Manual for Creating Atheists by Peter Boghossian, in which he rips apart relativism and goes through how to teach people that relativism is not a reliable way of processing the world. I'm currently reading The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, which so far feels like he believes relativism is a great mindset, though I haven't finished the book yet. I know Glenn loves this book, and he probably has good insight to this. I think a podcast on relativism would be a fascinating discussion. Let me know if you already released an episode on this and I just missed the boat. I would love to listen. Thanks, Ben.
Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you. Today's episode is not going to be the definitive discussion on relativism. Unless, of course, for you it is. See what I just did there? Now, hopefully you listened to the episode just previous to this one, which was recorded at the same time that we record this with the same people, but focused mainly on video blogger Jeremy Goff's sadly laughable claim that excommunication is an act of love. We do refer to that a couple of times in this conversation today, but, like calling excommunication an act of love, isn't that what an abuser does? Isn't that how abusers often call the act of abuse? They say, I'm sorry that you made me do this to you. I'm only doing this because you're really, really horribly bad. And I tough love you so much that I'll do whatever it takes to whip your sad ass back into acceptable shape. You're that bad and I love you that much. I mean, it's just gross. It's gross. But anyway, so today you'll see where that piece of the conversation, that review of Jeremy Goff, fit into this overall conversation between myself and Tom and Matt and Delany and Patreon supporter Peter, who sat in as we recorded this live, and of course, our special returning guest panelist, Chelsea Shields. But before I get into today's episode, I want to spend some time defining relativism, because it's tricky. And if today's conversation shows anything, it's how different people with different views can think that they're talking about the same issues when really, who knows what the hell any of us are ever really talking about, or why we're talking about it, or sometimes even how we're talking about it. Because Matt comes at this from his perspective as a former sex crimes prosecutor turned criminal defense attorney who has been spending a lot of time recently trying to better understand the different roles that he plays in his life as a man, a husband, a father, a former Mormon, a podcaster, and all of the experiences that he's had with so many different types of processes and outcomes. Some are unique to his experiences, and frankly, Matt didn't find Peter Boghossian particularly relevant or interesting.
And that's a goddamn problem with Boghossian. Every time I heard his clip, I'm, what the fuck are you talking about?
What?
I can say something, man. Let's talk about the issues, not around the issues.
You don't think he's talking about the issues?
No, because I think, again, we have to get in very clear specifics and very conversations with very specific people, because one of the problems that he's talking about relativism is all these data points.
Before we talk about how to have this approach, I better know who that person is across from me, what their experience is, what are the complexities in their life, what are the things in the moment that they're dealing with right now today. Did they just not sleep? Did they just have one of the worst blow-ups with their kid? Is their kid suicidal? This approach and the criticism to relativism, and especially because it's difficult to really understand what that means, provides too much cover for people to not be relativists in areas that they ought to be. And one of the areas I was thinking about was love.
And then you have Chelsea, who comes at this from her perspective as a double PhD in both cultural anthropology and biological anthropology, as well as her roles as a woman and a mother and a former teacher, a former Mormon, a former field ethnographer, and probably a future advocate for chickens' rights, as long as they are alive.
If the chicken's dead and he just has this weird sexual fetish, I'm with Tom.
Don't ask. You'll get all that context soon enough. And of course, Tom comes into this discussion with his unique background, and Delany with hers, and me with mine, and all of us tried to wrestle with this idea of relativism and follow the organic course of this discussion the best that we could. But having listened back to this several times now, I'm still not convinced that we were all talking about the same thing. But that kind of illustrates the point, doesn't it? Because, all right, here's the definition of relativism. Relativism is the idea that knowledge, truth, and morality exist in relation to culture, society, or historical context, that they're not absolute. Relativism is the idea that views are relative to differences in perception and consideration. There is no universal truth. There is no objective truth according to relativism, rather that each point of view has its own truth. So relativism essentially means that truth or perceived reality is dependent upon the relationships between things. So if someone asks, is such and such true? And your answer is, well, it depends on yada, yada, yada. Well, that's basically an example of relativism. If you're convinced that there's no way that there is a God and you ask someone, do you believe in God? Or if you ask, do you believe that the earth is 6,000 years old? Or you ask, do you believe that having sexual intercourse with the carcass of a dead chicken before you cook it and eat it is wrong?
If the chicken's dead and he just has this weird sexual fetish, I'm with Tom.
And they say, well, that depends on yada, 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 yada. You know, that can be really, really frustrating. Because you ask those questions because you want a clear-cut answer. And science gives clear-cut answers, right? Right? Well, before you brush all of this stuff off and say, oh, ridiculous, of course there is universal objective truth, science would never put up with this crap, let me tell you a little bit about Albert Einstein, because Einstein demonstrated, as a universal objective truth, mind you, the theory of relativity. Special relativity, where the laws of physics are the same for all observers in uniform motion relative to one another. But when that motion is not uniform, for example, when someone is sitting on a park bench and another person is walking towards that person on the park bench, well, the laws of physics are no longer uniformly experienced by both of those people. They're relative to each person's position and movement through space and time.
I mean, Einstein's theory of relativity, it's the way we learned about it in school. You know, there's a guy on a train and a guy on a platform, a light gets put on. To the guy on the train, oh, all the lights came out at the same time. To the guy on the platform, because of time, speed, light, right? It looks like it comes off at different times. So where you are standing determines the truth or the reality of that experience.
So the idea that relativity is at odds with scientific objective reality, for me, is kind of super tricky right off the bat. Add to that the different types of relativity that we talked about today, because cultural relativity or cultural relativism is not the same thing as moral relativism, and neither are the same thing as epistemological relativism, but we use those terms interchangeably as if they all mean the same thing, and they don't. So cultural relativism is the idea that a person's beliefs, values, and practices can only be understood when viewed through the eyes of that person's culture rather than be judged against somebody outside of the culture. And if you think that you're influenced by only one culture, by the way, think again. So a lot of what we talk about in today's conversation falls under this category of cultural relativism. But there's also moral relativism. And moral relativism is concerned with the differences in moral judgments, in what is considered universally to be right or wrong across different peoples and cultures. And there's different kinds of moral relativism. There's descriptive moral relativism that holds that some people do in fact disagree about what is moral. There's metaethical moral relativism, which holds that in such disagreements, nobody is objectively right or wrong. And normative moral relativism holds that because nobody is right or wrong, we ought to tolerate the behavior of others even when we disagree about the morality of it. Now, Peter Boghossian's claim is that both cultural and moral relativism, that these influences have creeped their way into epistemology, and he sees this as a dangerous and false conflation of those ideas. And by epistemological relativism, he means that any way of coming to knowledge is just as good as any other. So, you see how tricky and pedantic it is to keep all of this straight, right? And how many of us really have the patience or the discipline or the interest to untangle this big knotted ball of sentences and words and definitions? It was tricky for us as a panel to have this difficult but interesting and often thought-provoking discussion. In the end, do we shed any light on either the dangers or the benefits of cultural, moral, or epistemological relativism? Well, that all kind of depends, doesn't it, on how you end up seeing this. See what I did just there? All right, so let's just get right into the conversation. It's a long one, but I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Chelsea. How are you doing?
Chelsea.
Hi. How's it going? This is
Good.
fun. It's been a long time.
It has been. What have you been up to?
Life. I'm working on a bunch of big projects and
Of course you are.
hoping to get back to academia here soon and writing a book and all the things.
Are you writing a book?
Yeah.
Now you got a double PhD, right? And it was anthropology and was it
Biological.
evolutionary biology or?
Yeah. So I started in cultural anthropology. This is why this topic is so important.
Right.
I hated the ambiguity. I hated, I would be teaching a class on African studies, knowing the language, speaking, and be then told I'm having cultural appropriation. And I'm like, crap, well, I don't want that. Right.
Yeah.
And then you have, as a young anthropologist, postmodern anthropology is all like, you can't say anything. It has to be the voice. And so everyone's just so careful. It's exactly what some of your listeners are frustrated with. I was like, I just want an answer. I want to be able to find the science of it, the permanency, the objectivity. And so I actually started a whole other degree in the biological anthropology, which is more the human evolution, evolutionary psychology, evolutionary science, and how the body develops. So at least I could dive a little deeper into those answers and for the moment have some objective truth. And so that's exactly what I did.
Cool. Well, it will be invaluable to have your voice as part of tonight's episode. We got some fun clips. And in addition to the clips that you heard, I added some Jonathan Haidt stuff from The Righteous Mind.
Of course you did.
Yeah, so we can play a little quiz, and I'll say, "Is this moral or immoral?" And we'll play the clip. What he describes. I don't
want to do that. I'll mess up.
You'll mess up?
Yes, I'll say the wrong thing, and someone will get pissed.
Awesome. Yes, that's what we're all about, right, Tom?
That's right. Let's get people pissed.
Yeah. So welcome Peter and Wendy, who are sitting in and joining us, our Patreon supporters. We may have a few more join in. It seems like the last few times we've done this, we've had maybe 3, 4, 5 people on at any given time. So if either of you, Peter or Wendy, have something that you want to say, feel free to jump in at any point. Before we get to the bulk of the episode and play those clips, I want to do kind of like a I don't know if it's quite Mystery Science Theater 3000 style. There's a video, like a vlog, a video blog that somebody made last Sunday. He's a 27-year-old faithful Mormon named Jeremy Goff, who does a blog called My Life, and he sets the record straight about ex-Mormon lies and myths. And so he was talking, explaining excommunication.
And that's the thing is, Jeremy's not going to be aware of it because he doesn't see it. He's not affiliated with all that kind of stuff. But I've seen it.
He's recused himself of the need to do any of that. Because for the reason that you stated earlier, he has deferred any decision-making authority to his leaders. You guys just tell me what to do and I'll do it, and I don't have to reason. It plays right into this whole faith as epistemology discussion because he's like, I don't need to figure out how to come to knowledge. I don't need to have to figure out how to figure out truth for myself to be able to parse out when the church leaders are saying the right thing or when they're saying the wrong thing, because I just have faith that they are the representatives of God and that decision's been made for me. And so, I mean, this is right there in that faith as epistemology thing. And so the topic that we're going to focus on tonight is this moral relativism topic that one of our listeners, the reason we've done this review, this is the fourth part. The reason we've done this is because he sent the email and said, it sounds to me like infants on thrones are becoming moral relativists. What gives? And I would say if we really were moral relativists, we would be saying, oh, sure, whatever Jeremy thinks is okay. it's all right. His way of coming to knowledge, it's all right. Don't question. It's not wrong what he's saying, but I don't hear anybody saying that.
Nope.
So, all right. So let's kick it off with a little bit of an introduction because we talked a bit before, Chelsea, but welcome back to Infants on Thrones. It's been probably 4 years, maybe. Oh, it's been a long time. But having you on for the moral relativism conversation, I'm really excited about. But talk so that I don't have to let listeners know what have you been up to over the last 4 years, and what do you expect to talk about tonight with this moral relativism stuff?
Well, I'm excited. This is a fun topic. I brought out some of my old Anthro 101 texts and the debates I used to have with students. And I haven't been working in academia for the last 4 years. And so my heart's missing it. So this is a really fun night for me. Same old. I mean, I finished up the cultural and biological anthropology PhDs. And so I finally walked, which has taken me quite a few years as a single mom and provider. So that was a huge moment, a really fun moment. I've gotten off social media just for all the research and all the privacy and figuring out mental health stuff because I study social science and what actually makes people happy or not happy and how the placebo effect, right? How human interaction affects our bodies. And so just having done enough of that research, I figured oh my gosh, this is the worst thing that's happening to us and our family, even our teens. We have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old and everyone's off social media. And it's been a really interesting year. We've kind of done an experiment year. And so I'm not as connected to everyone, but that's kind of where I'm at. And I'm so excited to talk about this subject today.
Wait, this is going to take us totally off topic, but I find it fascinating. Are you saying that social media is scratching a social itch for people that is having a placebo effect? It's making us feel like we're connected to groups of people, but we're really not. We're connected to these electronic devices. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm kind of saying something a little opposite. I'll hurry and explain it differently. So when we talk about the placebo effect, we're not necessarily talking about something fake causing something real. Yeah. What we're talking about is the effect of a meaning or a cultural interaction or a social interaction. Something that is non-physical can then trigger or elicit biological processes.
Right.
So social interactions give us different emotions, give us different chemical, give us oxytocin. Any kind of social interaction gives us something. It might also make us feel sick. We might feel embarrassed. We might be like, shit, why did I say that? We also feel bad with social interactions. What's happening is we have so many devices on our to read micro expressions, mirror neurons. We have spindle neurons that allow our emotions and our executive functioning in the prefrontal cortex to meet really quickly. for us to read facial expression. So I can read, Glenn, if you're mad at me. I can kind of pick up if you're on my side. You know, in my big family of like 52 cousins and 9 uncles and aunts that everyone's still Mormon, I would never go up to my most conservative cousin and talk about my politics or my abortion views, right? But what social media did is it made all of that on the same level playing field where we're not allowed to read social expression. So it's basically very, very low quality social interaction where the ability to make mistakes is so great that it often causes worse social pain than if you just got rid of it altogether and had more of these high quality social interactions.
But because we don't have the nonverbal cues to tell us how we should present ourselves to the audience. It's just like this blank.
Well, and it's kind of combined all our audiences. So I know how to present myself to my Mormon family, but I also know how to present myself to my liberal, feminist, right-wing, activists. But I would not necessarily say the same thing to that same audience. And yet that's what Facebook's doing. It's flattening that social circle. So you can't be as careful. But on top of that, you still have your biology. So if someone says a mean comment, I mean, after my TED Talk, I basically was like not talking to anyone but my close family for a year because I just got so much hate. And my body still takes that. I'm not, because it's digital doesn't mean it didn't affect me. There's still a social biological reaction that happens from any social interaction. There's a reason why. I'll tell you the evolutionary, studies someday, but it still happens. So basically you're setting yourself up for lots of low quality social connections, lots of mistakes that are being made, and your body's taking the brunt of all that. And it was never meant for it. We have all these adaptations we're kind of bypassing, and it's hurting us.
That's really interesting. We need to invite you back on to do an episode that unpacks more of that because I find that absolutely fascinating. It's not getting edited out. No. It might get Easter egg, but yeah, we'll see. Cool. Well, welcome back, Chelsea. And then we also have Delany here. And this is the 4th time you've been with us for each one of these in the series. How you doing, Delany?
I'm doing well. It's been a pleasure. Yeah,
it's great to have you on. And Tom's back for his 3rd of the 4. We missed you last week, Tom.
Hey, I missed you too.
And then we've got Matt. And Matt, this is your first venture into the manual for creating atheists. How you doing, Matt?
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm back on Mormon expression, like running down the horn, introducing all the panelists. Well, we don't do that on Infants on Thrones. What the hell are you doing? So, yeah, well, we had kind of a weird start with that Jeremy guy, and then we've got Wendy and Peter who are in the peanut gallery watching us right now. So, welcome to the two of you.
Hi, Chelsea. It's good to see you again.
It's really good to see you too, Matt. I can see just the top of your head, though.
I know. I started lounging here because I can get back into frame.
Make yourself comfortable, dude.
Yeah, I know.
All right. So I think as I was preparing for this, and really, I mean, this is the 4th episode that all started because of this moral relativism that, been working up towards it. And I think just in the last couple of days in putting the clips together and trying to think about it, I've started to understand it in a different way than I did before. And I think it's really helpful. It'll come out in some of these clips that we're going to be listening to tonight. But I think what Peter Boghossian is basically saying is that because he spends some time in this chapter talking about the history of liberalism and liberal thought in the U.S. And he says that at one point, because there was so much emphasis on tolerance and inclusion and multiculturalism, that you've got certain areas where you can't really say that one culture is superior to another. And so there's this thing called cultural relativism that developed. And then from that idea of cultural relativism, it shifted to maybe like a moral relativism where you would say that even not just cultural practices, but also morals are culture bound instead of being an objective kind of morality. And that then it even evolved, evolved is the wrong word, but it encroached. I think he talks about it as like a parasite into the realm of epistemology, where you've got epistemological relativism. So you've got like this progression of cultural relativism, moral relativism, and then eventually epistemological relativism, where any type of way of coming to knowledge, he talked about Ouija boards or, traditional shamanic practices would trump scientific discoveries that can be falsifiable and objective and all these things. And people started thinking, not only can you not know anything objectively, you really shouldn't even go into that, because that makes you a bad person if you're a relativist, because you don't want to contradict anybody. So that's kind of my overall takeaway of what I think he's saying here in the relationship. But so I wanted to kind of lead with that. I don't know if others of you see it that way, if I'm right, if I'm wrong, but I kind of want to pose that as a question as we work through tonight. Did that make sense, what I said?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let me start with the first clip where he's going to talk about what he means by epistemological relativism and how his students would always say, well, that's just true for you, what you're talking about.
The purpose of this section is to teach readers how to disabuse others of epistemological relativism. That is, any way to come to knowledge is just as good as any other. Well, that's just true for you. When I started teaching critical thinking more than 2 decades ago, my attempts to undermine relativism were met with a common student refrain. Well, that's just true for you. Any argument I presented was either met with this mantra or with a similar utterance. You perceive through your own cultural lens, or you can't escape your Western hegemonic, imperialistic, white male-situated perspective. At first, I was stymied by these responses. No matter what examples I presented or what my reasoning was, I always met the same one-line objections. Over time, because of my experience teaching prison inmates, tens of thousands of students at colleges and universities throughout the country, and people on the street, I came to the conclusion that not only was this problem pervasive, but that it also made it impossible for me to teach people how to improve their reasoning. In order to reason well, one needs to be able to rule out competing or irrelevant alternatives. But one cannot do this if one believes that there's no way to make an objective judgment about those alternatives.
I actually don't disagree with much of what he said.
Yeah.
I'm pretty much on board with all of his claims and his notions. I'm just nodding my head. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually excited about this one because I agree with most of what he says instead of disagreeing with
Right.
the whole time. So it's a nice change.
Yeah, and I think the disagreement that we've had is more about approach and tone than it is content.
Yeah.
I disagree in kind of what he's saying.
Good.
So I actually
just to give us something to talk about.
Okay, I agree with what he's saying. I think it's built on the wrong premises. So for me, it's about which knowledge base do you value. So I have been to conferences and I've talked and I've heard people in the back of the room say, "Well, that's what she thinks." And I think, man, why did I go to 13 years of school? Why did I take anthropology so seriously and rigorously and work so hard if what I say is the same as someone who didn't do all that training, right? And they just stood up and talked about evolution, whatever their ideas were, right? If we're equivalent, then all of that work is useless. So on that one idea, I agree. But on the other idea, I think he's trying to make that universal. He's trying to say, if Western philosophical insight is correct, then everyone should listen to me in every single context. That's not true, right? If we're in a hospital and someone breaks a leg and here's a doctor that really got trained, here's the one that didn't, yes, you'll probably choose the doctor. But if this guy showed up to a church, a testimony meeting, no one in the room would think he was correct. It's all based on context and of what knowledge base you value. And he's trying to assert that because I have this Western degree in this Western world, I should be given this valuable knowledge base every single context I'm in. And that's not true. I shouldn't listen to him in 90% of context. But if he's talking about the thing he knows best, yeah, he trumps mine.
Yeah. What are different knowledge bases? Like you talked about different knowledge bases as if they're a thing. It depends on your knowledge base and how contextualized that is. Can you give me some examples of like knowledge bases? What do you mean when you're saying that?
Sure. So, if I go over to West Africa as a white person and I try to inculcate, public health policy, people aren't going to listen to me as well. I don't know the cultural context. I don't know the communication style. And we've learned that over time when we've tried to make sure people on the ground at really good health organizations are locals. They understand the language. They understand what's appropriate and not appropriate. And it's actually saved millions of lives. I mean, I could tell a history right now of how many lives American public health workers have lost, not meaning to. They meant well. They had the knowledge base in the Western context, right? They just weren't able to have the knowledge they needed to truly implement things that didn't also cause as much harm. And so I shouldn't listen to them if I'm in this context. If I'm in public health school at NYU, heck yeah, I should listen to everything they're saying.
I had a question. So he describes cultural relativism as if that's somebody's worldview, like there is relative truth, but everybody knows that culture is relative and truth is relative to culture. So people's truth is relative, but that doesn't mean there isn't objective truth. It just means that we all have a different perspective, and it should carry weight in trying to figure out issues in specific cultures or specific parts in the world where they have this filter that's unique to them. Does that make me a cultural relativist? Because I still believe in objective truth. They might be wrong about something, but you still have to work through their culture to address it.
I think this is what I was trying to say earlier, where I think there's a difference between cultural relativism and epistemological relativism, where I think that epistemological relativism is a form of relativism that is very narrowly focused on the way that people come to knowledge, whereas cultural relativism could be about any cultural practice. Right. And I think it's a lot easier to be kind of give and take, soft, respectful, tolerant of culture, things that are different culturally because of cultural differences, than epistemological differences. Like if you're talking about the age of the earth, mm-hmm. how are you accepting the age of the earth? Are you accepting it because of what mainstream science peer review data is telling us, or is it because of a book of scripture and faith claims? I think that's the difference when the cultural part of it bumps into the epistemological part. That's the question of, because I think I'm probably a cultural relativist. Maybe I'm even a moral relativist, but I'm not definitely an epistemological relativist in those sense. And I think that's where it can easily get confused and the lines can be blurred. But what he's focusing on, I think, is this epistemological relativism.
Well, he focuses on two things: processes and conclusions. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right when you're talking about processes and conclusions. The only time that perhaps we ought care is dependent on what the application of those conclusions are. The processes I could really care less about. If that's whatever if somebody wants to make a decision in their life about a Ouija board, I can quarrel with the process, but if that's their choice for them, that's fine. Now, so perhaps that makes me a moral relativist, or even say the word, a thinking
epistemological
relativist. But then I go to what's your conclusion? What did that Ouija board tell you? Well, it's dependent on what the question was, what the conclusion is. Well, it tell me I should, I eat, I'm going to eat wheat bread instead of white bread. Oh, great. Fantastic. That sounds like a great process for you. as far as making those decisions that can be very, very challenging for other people. And some people are crippled by having to make decisions without these other tools. And so if that's a tool that gets into a healthy place of making a decision, great. Now, if you tell me, well, I'm now going to murder somebody because the Ouija board told me, I have a problem with your conclusions and problems with the process that led to the conclusion. So distinguishing those two and getting in the weeds about what is each one of those matters. And herein is our problem. When we say relativist, moral relativist, as if that's a thing. And we understand explicitly what we're saying when we say processes, conclusions, thinking, all these different things. We are interpreting our own fictions of what that means for us. And so now we are engaged in relativism because we don't even have a agreement concretely about what the fuck we're talking about in the first place. So Hosian Bogosian first ought be more explicit in what process we're talking about and what conclusion we're talking about, and then what the integration or application of that conclusion is. So, for example, let me give two examples. Flat earthers. My gosh, their process and their conclusion sucks. Well, what's the application? Fucking nothing. Fucking nothing. So I don't care. Now, that same person may have a different process and a different conclusion about an application I do care about. And I may agree with that person as it affects the conclusion that they integrate, that I apply, that affects me. Great. You're a shitball wacko when it comes to flat earth, but you dig to recycle, homie. Let me wrap my arms around you because your process and conclusion got to a place that I can breathe with comfortably. All right. Let me do another example. A month ago, a man walks into my office and he says, my 4-year-old daughter was raped. And I went to the police and I don't really know what's going on. I don't really speak this language. And the police tell me I don't need a lawyer, but I'm scared. And I'm from Iran and I just don't really know what's going on. My gosh, you just stumbled on the greatest attorney you ever could have, sir. I know how to protect you and your daughter. I know how to protect you from the police and help you with the police. And I know the people that you're dealing with right now. I know the cops that you're dealing with really well. And yeah, you've got some issues, but we're going to get together and we're going to make sure that you're protected because there's concerns now about orders of protection, all these things. I said, here's the thing. You're in really good hands. My partner's wife speaks your language because she's from your country. Isn't this a great thing? All the resources that we have, isn't this a beautiful thing? He says, I have no money. I said, well, don't worry about that. Given what you've described, I want to take care of you, and I want to do this pro bono because your daughter deserves that. How happy I was. This would be a testimony moment to come in, ladies and gentlemen. This is how I know God is real. He brought this man into my office to protect his 4-year-old daughter, the only man who can protect him. How many people are me? How many people have a partner with a wife who speaks this language? And I got a call about an hour later. I said, Mr. Long, please forget my number. Please don't talk to your partner. Please don't talk to his wife. Please don't let them know I walked in there. We can't, nobody can know. Nobody can know. And if she's from my country, she may know people we know. I'm sorry, I can't, I do not want your help. There's application of a process and a conclusion that had impact. But my lack of understanding of that truth, that is what he needed was a stranger to protect him, not somebody that he could connect with. That's a truth that I now have to apply into my practice and into my life and in dealing with other people. Because the complexity of what that man was dealing with was lost because I didn't have the perspective, because I didn't have his perceptions. The awareness of that must force us to be open to listening, if nothing else, and to approach the world from a more relative approach, to expand our perceptions, knowing that our perceptions are flawed, and to expand our perspective, knowing that our perspective is always limited.
And you know, there's a phrase, Matt, that we've used quite a bit the last couple months. Is it simple but complex, or complex but nuanced? It's something like that. Complex and subtle. Complex and subtle. And I mean, to me, that's a lot of what you're saying. That's a lot of what I think the value of cultural relativism, moral relativism brings, is recognizing things aren't that simple. There are a lot of influencing factors, contributing factors to things, and you have to be really, really careful. When, like, you see a problem, you want to solve it, and you think, okay, boom, let's do it this way. Well, hang on a second.
Yeah,
you know,
we're not all Vanilla Ice, right?
If there was a problem, yo, I'll solve it. Check out the hook while my DJ revolves it.
I mean,
are any of us?
Well, you know, if there was a problem, yo, I'll solve it. Check out the hook while my DJ revolves it. Ice, ice, baby.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you for that.
Sorry, that was these lyrics just in my head, and you hit a phrase, and it just scratches an itch, and I just have to get it out. I'm sorry.
You know, I can relate to that, my friend. Yeah. I know how that is.
Yeah. The floodgate was open. Sorry. So one of the I was very close to going into so psychology as a graduate school, and I was just I really loved the studies, and particularly about the idea of confounding variables and unknown variables, and really trying to develop a study that accounts for all those factors that could contribute to either a process or a conclusion, and locking it down and saying, man, I did this so well. And what's so fun about those studies is seeing the other experts in the field come in and be like, yeah, that was pretty good, but what about ba 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 ba, and what about ba 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 ba? And it's the ba 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 that's so fun, because you start seeing just how complex all these interactions and organisms are. And to me, life is a constant battle of engaging in a study every day and seeing what variables do I know and what variables do I not know, and what variables confound this outcome and this process. So that's the approach. That's the epistemological approach, I think, that Hoshin Boghossian's ultimately talking about. He's saying, let's apply at the root of it the ability to be aware more broadly and move more slowly until you have sufficient data points that are replicatable and reliable enough, because other people have said, yeah, that's my shit too. That's your shit too. We got enough people who agree on that shit. Now we say, okay, we're just going to act as if that is how it is. It's reliable because it's replicatable, right? That's all life is one big giant psychological mindfuck study, trying to control and understand and expand the variables day in, day out, interaction in, interaction out. And we're really fucking bad at it, because nice being God. So let's all pretend that we are God and ignore everything else.
I don't know what to do with that. Peter's got it.
I think part of the reason why we struggled with the approach he's had is that it's arrogant or it's impersonal. But I think the gap between, Matt, what you're saying, and part of the reason we're struggling is it's the application of that and the way I think he's advocating it being applied that discounts the lived experience of people. And if you've got two opposing epistemologies, the movement from one to the other, the trying to get somebody to change their view, he doesn't have firsthand experience in how traumatic that can be. And so he's looking at it.
Do you know that, Peter, that he doesn't?
That's true. I don't know that. I'm assuming based on the way he's writing.
It sounds like he's not taking that into consideration, is what you're saying?
Yeah. So Shermer, for example, in the introduction stated pretty explicitly that he had seen kind of essentially both sides of the coin, and that tempered the way he phrased things. I don't get that impression from him.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily that he's wrong. Like, Matt, I agree. Exactly what you're saying is really the root of what he's trying to explain. But the what's next, the how do you move somebody from one thing to the next, discounts how painful that can be, and how you do that as opposed to should it be done is where I think a lot of the frustration is coming from.
Well, see, I just jumped to should it be done, but is it even possibly done? I think that's ultimately the conflict, is the belief that there's some form of persuasion that can move somebody off something like this. I think that's the conflict. There's no way for that to happen, and that's
not true. I will disagree with you.
Okay, you just done it.
But I'll do it in a way that
I hope you have a very good anecdotal example to use.
I can never beat the one you just said, because that was probably one of the most brilliant things I've ever heard, and the way you expressed it, I would record that and play it for my students. I mean, that was brilliant. So, but I will disagree that there is no formalized process of paradigm shifting or cultural change, or how to get someone from one epistemological view to another. We actually have some great science on that. One of my favorite books in the world, Matt, you would love this. Everyone would love this. And I think I mentioned it once on a podcast before, so apologies, but it's been 4 years. So let's do it. It's Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And what it does is it goes through the history of science and technology, and it shows when the idea, like the earth is round, all the way through every scientific revolution. At first, there's these stages of how people go from, no way, the earth is not round, I'm going to, kill you, that angry. And it goes through, well, why are people angry at first when a new idea is presented? Why is the first stage, so defensive? And then it goes through, well, what's the next stage after you get over the anger and the defensiveness and the possibility that that's not even plausible, right? That opens up your paradigm a little. At first, you resist. That's what keeps your worldview together. Second, opens up a little bit, but you kind of put it on the shelf. And that's literally a word he used. And it was the first time in science I had ever seen that put it on the shelf idea that we used in all of our Mormon upbringing. I was like, oh, other people have this? And I started to make these connections between, these scientific revolutions with the kind of my own paradigm shift, these revolutions of how people leave the church. And it really maps onto it. It's not a perfect map. It was never meant to explain how people leave cultural paradigms, but his scientific revolution, patterns really do follow what gets someone out of an entrenched mindset and into a more open mindset, and then into a place where they can actually accept and now defend this new mindset. And there's some really great writing on that.
I think we miscommunicated what I was trying to evoke, but I'm really happy that caused you to say that, because I'm gonna go see Thomas Kuhn, and that sends me off in another area. So that was valuable. Thank you.
Cool. All right, I want to play the next clip, and I think there's a connection between what he's about to say here and things that we've been talking about, especially when we're talking about the maybe trying to understand why there might be immediate anger and resistance to a paradigm shift. Why there can be trauma as you're going from one view to another, and this is something that I think that technically he's right, but I think maybe the application of it is wrong. But we can talk about it after the clip. So let me bring it up here.
What I'm about to write may confound those inculcated in the academic zeitgeist. A criticism of a process, like the process of understanding the age of the earth through reading ancient texts, or a criticism of a cultural practice, like using the metric system or making women cover themselves, or a criticism of a religious text, like the Book of Mormon or the Urantia book, is not the same as a criticism of a person, nor is it the same as a criticism of a race of people. Granting ideas dignity has two consequences. The first consequence is that criticizing faith traditions becomes viewed as a form of hate speech, like saying the N-word. This kind of political correctness further buttresses faith from dialectical criticism. Most people won't criticize faith out of fear people will think they're not only bad people, but also that they're mean-spirited, angry, bigoted, prejudiced, insensitive, hateful people. Cognitive, epistemological, and moral relativism are toxins that students trained in the humanities regularly consume in large doses. They're taught to withhold judgments on different epistemologies, cultural practices, and moral systems. Consequently, their ability to make critical evaluations has been severely damaged. Before faith can be exposed as a faulty epistemology, it's vital to disabuse people of the relativist notion that any epistemology is either just as good as any other, a bizarre and contradictory egalitarian relativism, or that epistemologies are impossible to judge.
All right. I think the first thing that I take some issue with, I think technically he's right. It's not the same thing to criticize a process as it is to criticize the person who's doing that process or the group of people whose process that is. Technically, it's not the same thing. But emotionally, it doesn't feel any different. And I think that kind of sums up the criticism that we've given to the approach and the tone so far in reviewing this book. I wonder if the fact that they're not the same thing is used as cover to then say, so I don't need to be sensitive or tolerant or respectful, because if you give ideas cover, you give them dignity, then you run into all these problems that he talked about. But I kind of have some issue with that. And then maybe another direction that we could go with it is the way that people are taught in university. And I know that's his main area of expertise. And so that's where he's really focusing, but that they're taught to not criticize other cultures or not criticize other epistemological views, and that leads to an inability to make correct decisions or judgments on something. So, and I maybe that's true, maybe it's not. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. I guess I want to hear more about the emotional reaction to challenging a process.
Okay.
Because I'm trying to.
The first thing that I thought about, Matt, was when I was having some issues with things in the church, and I was living in Japan. My dad was back here in Arizona, and so I was doing this long distance, trying to reach out, trying to engage him in some of these areas that I had a problem with, and I wrote like a list of, I don't know, 45 things I didn't like about the church and maybe 30 things that I did like about the church. I was trying to be balanced as much as I could. And as he was reading this thing, all these things that I didn't like about the church, what he wrote back to me in his response was, it showed that he thought that I was calling him a fool, that I thought that he was stupid. It's right. Like Elder Holland in that BBC interview where he's like, well, I've been to a good school. I've read some books. I'm not a dodo kind of thing, where the guy wasn't criticizing Holland per se. He was criticizing, he was just reporting what other people had said as critics. But so my whole point with the emotions on it, Matt, is that people are very connected to their faith, especially. And when faith is their means of coming to knowledge of the world and forming their worldview, if you go after it, if you challenge it, they're going to feel personally challenged. And there is an emotional response that comes from that I think gets in the way of dialogue.
Well, I guess that as to the process, though, a process should not necessarily be religion. And often the conclusion is, right? The conclusion is, I think, ends up being religion. This is my firmly held belief. I think the problem happens in religion. The process becomes the conclusion, and they get conflated where, this is the one true way to get the answer. And so in deviating from that, you're deviating from, the approved dogma. And so that is when the process is the religion. And if there is an emotional reaction, then I say there's a problem with the process, and then we ought not be engaging in the process, because then now it's religion. So what's the hope of changing the process? Because that's ultimately what you're saying. I think of, the conversations with religious is, or with religious people is, my approach is this. And that highlights it's a different process but it's a shift in, I'm not saying what your process should be. We're disagreeing in our approach. We may end up agreeing about our conclusions, maybe not, but now we know why, because our approaches are different. So I struggle with, well, let's challenge a process. That only makes sense if the process is one that is built to be open to any sort of adjustment. But the religious one is not, or I should say many religious ones are not. There are religious ones where that is part of the process. I think specifically about the Amish that say part of the process is go be exposed to this, not be shielded from it. The Rumspringa, a very different process.
Sure.
Religious process that could be, quarreled with, depending on. Anyway, so it's again, getting into the specifics of what is that process, because for some people their process should be, well, I pray to God. Okay, well, now we can have a conversation about that process, and the application and. So
but when we're talking about processes, Matt, I think we need to be careful that the types of processes that are under discussion here are those epistemological processes, those processes that bring someone to an understanding of the world. And so are you saying that anybody's process for bringing them to an understanding is okay with you as long as the conclusion is sound?
No, I'm saying their process is irrelevant to me until and unless their conclusion is something that impacts me in some way. And I think part of the conflict that happens too often is that we care too much, too often, about the processes and the processes regardless of the conclusion, and often the conclusion regardless of whether or not the conclusion affects us. And in doing that, we create our own religion, because at some point what we're waiting for even the most minor thing to say, that's not how life is done. This is how life is done. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. I
love that. My social anthropology, kind of like take on this is way different. We're going to take a 180. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Only because I don't think what we're talking about is ideas. And I loved philosophy, but I had to leave and go into anthropology because I just felt like it was so devoid of the human part of us. That it's kind of this Steven Pinker mentality that there's some ghost in the machine. Our head is separate than our body. Thoughts can be taken out of a context and seen in a vacuum. And what I think people are assuming is that you can separate a person from their ideas. And I don't think you can. If someone's ideas are critiqued, you feel bad. To me, as an anthropologist, emotion is inherently connected with ideas because you feel emotion. It's an evolutionary warning system to your body to either help you do pro-social things or avoid anti-social things. Yeah. So in my mind, when we're in a conversation and we have two conflicting perspectives, what we're doing is a modern day dominance competition. We're just animals and we're trying to see who dominates. And either one will walk out and win, and now dad's the dad and we can all live together and be happy. And you're right, Dad, you're right. Mormonism's great. Or guess what? We fight and I win and he follows me, or guess we go our separate ways. That has always been how a status competition happens and ends. One will win or you go your separate ways. And look at all of our status competitions we've had with family, friends, since we've all left the church. That's kind of how it is. But we all have that other thing. And I think this is the meat we're trying to get to, the application. Why are we even talking about this? Can it do some good in the world? I have friends who got married at 19, still live in Rigby, Idaho, have raised their kids, are super Mormon, that still are so kind to me. So our epistemological worldviews, completely are opposite. We went our separate ways. We live these separate lives.
Are you trying to say, without saying they haven't gone to college, they have, they're kind of in the same place that they were before, trying to tiptoe around that? Yes. But that's kind of what you mean.
Well, because I would feel like that is a valuation on what I value. And that's putting her in a place. She might not value that stuff. She values being a part of a small town community and helping out a PTA.
Right.
I don't do that. And people could look down on me for that. Right. So I don't really want to critique.
I got you. Yeah.
Right. But I want to say there are dominance competitions where one has to win and you're never going to be happy. That's why I love what Matt just said but why do you care so much? If that's not the world or the nest you want to rule or the religion you want to found, why do you care if that guy does, right? Unless it affects your life. And so I think it's just these status competitions, and you decide do I care enough about your perspective to agree with you and follow you? Or am I going to say, no, you're wrong, and affect that relationship?
I like everything she said. I agree with Chelsea. Good job. Why do we do that when it doesn't matter? I think I have a suggestion I want to play with. That almost a spin on your dominance play and the status. That I think that's true, but it comes from such a place of insecurities that when we see someone doing something different, it becomes shit, maybe I'm doing it wrong. So instead of critically and fairly and honestly evaluating your own approach to see if you are meeting your needs in an authentic and a health and wellness filled way, instead we say, let's just attack that person because they're not doing what I'm doing. I'm not comfortable when other people are doing different things than me, especially in areas on which I feel strongly about and are meaningful to me. So that must be wrong. That's that status dominance play that ultimately we just don't know what the fuck we're doing. And we think are afraid that maybe other people do. And that frightens us perhaps more than anything else. So the response is to, you should do what I'm doing because it really makes me feel better. Or I don't know what I'm doing and I see some people over here. I'll just start doing what they're doing and then I'll be safer, protected, and feel better about myself, even if it's not quite right for me. I'll just quiet that. I'll put that on the shelf because this is better than that angst that I had of feeling alone and doing this differently. I was thinking about some of our conversations that we have, how stupid they are. And I was listening to one the other day. A friend of mine was sitting on the ground. Another person, they started just kind of talking about why they sit the different ways that they do. And I thought, this is a fascinating fucking conversation. I couldn't care less about either one. I'm glad they're taking care of their body in whichever way is comfortable. But what I was picking up on was it was really this. It felt like this jealousy of, I can't sit that way, or I don't sit way this way. So now I need to justify the way that I move my body. And then there becomes this conversation of really justifying our existence with each other. This is why I do what I do. Please accept it or adopt it. One of them, about the things that don't even matter. And consider the ways that we do that in justifying our behaviors to ourselves ultimately. And looking for that validation because we can't give it to ourselves because we're really not comfortable in how we're moving our own selves. And that's sad.
So I actually agree with everything you said about the status, but I think there's a little positivity here, because what we're also doing when we're saying, no, new idea, don't do that, is we're also trying to say, hey, I know this culture. I have an amount of knowledge. And if you do these things, you're not going to fit here. And I remember being super LDS and getting converts, and kind of teaching about our culture and kind of cousins or people in my life that I now regret very much, kind of ushering in a kind way, persuading them to kind of toe the line, basically, but in the nicest way I could. And it wasn't necessarily that I was insecure and didn't believe. I knew that I was right. That's why I was like, if you don't follow me, if you don't follow this way, right? Like this guy we watched just now, right? We listened to him talk to all these people. If you don't follow my way, you're going to be led astray. And so there is this like boundary making group kind of that people do have a little bit of responsibility over. And then there's another thing. Let's not look at it in that way. I think we all have like PTSD over that of knowledge bases. So if you are a mentor to people in your field, let's say you're a designer, let's say you're a lawyer or whatever, and you see someone that's starting to break boundaries in your field and you're like, crap, don't do that. You're going to get disbarred. Or a journalist. I had a great talk with a journalist the other day, and he's had to teach these young millennials of like, no, journalism is not fake news. You have to fact check if it really was Overcast and if it says Overcast. We fact check everything, and that is the only way we can not be fake news. And so he had to like bring these people into these boundaries, even if it meant shaming it's just the way we interact with each other. And I think sometimes listening to these earlier clips, I think people sometimes forget we're a head attached to a body. Like, we can't just think and have ideas. We're always in a social interplay in some way or another, and something is driving our behavior. And it's not always the truth, intellectual vacuum. Sometimes it's, oh man, don't step aside. You're not going to get, your degree. Oh man, you're not going to get married. Like, we're always have these different drives of why we're convincing people to do things.
What you said made me think of one of the clips coming up, which I might just fast forward to because it's taken us a while to get through these. But where Jonathan Haidt talks about, no, it's fine with me. Where Jonathan Haidt talks about the reason, the thinking that we do in our heads, is that something that precedes the emotion that we feel? Or does it come after we feel the emotion? And is it something whenever we're in some kind of a situation whether we're having to make a judgment on a cultural thing, a moral thing, or an epistemological decision, is it only our rationality that is able to make that decision, or is it primarily the emotion?
You know the clip where he's like kind of talking about cultural relativism? And
the avocado, he gives the avocado example.
Or was it the next one? I can't remember which one, but he says cultural relativism means you have it's impossible to know another culture. And that's just completely wrong. That's like the wrong definition.
This current manifestation of liberalism is a skeleton of former incarnations and is best described not by what it is, but by the parasitic ideologies that have given that skeleton its corrupted form. Relativism, subjectivity, tolerance, diversity, multiculturalism, respect for difference, and inclusion. These invasive values betray classical and social liberalism's history of standing for basic freedoms and fighting all forms of tyranny. Tolerance is another liberal value, and by the same line of thinking has been perverted into another value that undermines reason. Tolerance only works when there's reciprocity. That is, tolerance doesn't handle intolerance very well. When tolerance and the protection offered by toleration are extended from people and cantilevered out to ideas, we end up protecting intolerance, anti-science views, irrationality, and all other forms of rank bias. Many societies that enshrine faith-based processes are truly, profoundly intolerant of homosexuals, intolerant of women's rights, intolerant of minority rights, intolerant of other faith traditions, intolerant of freedom of speech, intolerant of freedom of assembly, intolerant of freedom of religion, etc. Leftism and the values I've just discussed that piggyback on it have extended the value of tolerance to social, cultural, and epistemic practices.
Was that the one that you were thinking of, Chelsea, or is it one after that?
It's the one after that.
Okay. I think the reason that I picked that clip is because the first time I heard it, it sounded like he was really attacking these ideals like tolerance and respect and inclusion and multiculturalism. Like, you might as well be like a white supremacist. It sounded really, really horrible to me.
Beware of the tolerance trap. I know some general authority said that.
Yeah, you hear that in church too, where they're like, beware of too much tolerance. Yeah. But again, when I put this back into the very narrow focus of epistemological relativism, then I'm like, okay, I think what he's saying is that these liberal values came in and infected the epistemological relativism. But I don't know really what to do with it. It makes me uncomfortable to say I'm not on the side of tolerance.
It makes me think of the International Hijab Day. And there's this big campaign and all these hashtags with women wearing their hijab. But then there were also a flood of women taking them off and burning them and saying, this is not something that I want to parade around as my freedom to wear this. I want to take it off and burn it as, symbolism of me being more free without it. So yeah, it's a fine line. It's like, you're tolerating a culture, but if that culture harbors holds other people down, then it's tricky. You have to navigate it very trickily.
Yeah. The other reaction I had as I was listening to that was when he talks about tolerance needs reciprocation to be effective. I don't know. This is another one of those things that he says as if it's a fact, but I don't. Are there studies that demonstrate that? Like it just doesn't seem right, and it does seem like it's one of those things that maybe in a narrow context, if you define the context, that it would be right, but to have it be generally true doesn't make a lot of sense, and it makes me think about conversations that I've had with other former Mormons who. They don't want to give their Mormon relatives the benefit of the doubt on something because they know that their Mormon relatives wouldn't give them the benefit of the doubt on it. And they're like, it's not going to be reciprocated. My tolerance of them isn't going to be reciprocated. So I'm just not going to be kind or respectful or things like that. And that may be why I'm kind of having that reaction as well. I think it's kind of irrelevant how somebody responds to you if you're going to be tolerant or not.
Right. I mean, I agree with him. I don't think any idea should be so sacred that it's not
above criticism.
Right.
Or discussion. Yeah.
Exactly.
For sure.
However, I think of like New Name Noah, and he puts these temple videos out. I don't know how effective that is in
yeah, now you have to kind of ask yourself, what's the purpose of that? What's he trying to...
Has he put any videos out recently?
I don't know. I just know, I just know what he does. I don't know how effective that is at proving the church isn't true. I think it just pisses members off and makes people who already don't understand that tradition think even more, oh gosh, those Mormons are so weird. Like, I support him because I think everything should be criticized. Nobody should be killed because they are drawing Allah or whatever, but I also still have kind of a gut reaction to those temple videos because...
a gut reaction meaning it makes you feel uncomfortable?
Kind of, or just like, I don't know. I guess we're all playing a different role in this post-Mormon world. It's just what is his end game for doing that? And some days I would be totally on board with it, and other times I'm like, I don't know. It's never too far. Like I said, everything should be on the table for scrutiny, but.
He would say his end game is educating people and informing them. And maybe that ties into the hijab example as well. At what point does consent start to play a role in this? I mean, if somebody can wear the hijab or wear garments or burn them, at what point are they consenting to do either of those things in either direction? And should that temper the way we approach how we deal with that particular issue?
Right. That's
with how other people deal with their religion. Yeah, I think we should temper ourselves in the way we deal with how other people deal with their own spiritual practice. So can I ask you, Delany, can I go back to something you said? I was really, you're really close to something I wanted to hear. But you said something about these roles we play, these new roles or different roles as in the ex-Mormon world. Mm-hmm. I wanted to hear what that these roles that you're talking about and what those look like. And
I just mean some people are more in your face about it, and other people are, I don't know, trying to build bridges, trying to meet halfway. I don't necessarily want to be. Well, maybe I'll explain it this way. Okay, so I live in West Virginia, and I've gotten to meet a lot of different people that I would not have been exposed to had I still lived in Utah. So I have some Jewish friends, some Baptist friends, some Christian friends, a little bit of everybody here. And it was a relief not being a member anymore to just kind of take whatever they're into and accept them for who they are and put our differences, like it's not even an issue. You know, that's their thing. It's not my thing, but whatever, we're still friends. Why wouldn't I apply that same point of view to members of the church? It's just one other religion. It's just one other culture or faith tradition. Because I came from it, yeah, it's triggering, and yeah, I don't agree with a lot of stuff, but...
Well, I think Jeremy Goff answered that question in that very first video that we watched, Delany. It's because you broke covenants.
I did, and I don't know.
So it's impossible for you to come back and see value, and because you're just fighting against God.
My light is gone.
Man, I love what you just said, and it just resonates so much with something that's been in my mind lately about roles and about my roles and the connection of roles to rules. And in order to maintain my role, I have to follow certain rules. And usually those rules were developed by somebody else. And if we're talking about roles of the Exmoor community, then who are setting the rules? Are we?
I don't know. It's just a thing. It's something somebody will write a book about in 50 years about the anthropology of the big exodus.
I'm saying something a little different, which is if we stop following other people's rules and stop following the roles that we play in ex-Mormonism, then we're able to treat those people the way that is authentic, the way you would treat other religious people with the same shit that Mormons have.
Right.
The problem is, Matt, if you ignore the roles and you stop following the rules, then very quickly you're going to go off the rails.
In what way?
Clever.
In what way?
See, I think it goes back to biology.
But what I'm saying is ex-Mormons, stop following other people's rules. Stop following your roles. And
I think we already
Mormons
are.
and other people. Are we?
Yes. The reason Kate Kelly took a different path than me was not that we didn't have the exact same epistemological view. We did. It was because she has a personality that cannot be more opposite of mine.
I'm so happy you brought up that example.
So think about it, though. But think about it, like, and we're still friends, but like, her personality will do things that my personality would sooner die, right? And I think vice versa, probably in her perspective. And it's not because we don't see the viewpoint the same way. And I love what Delany said, is I always said, heck, I wish there were more radical people out there because they push that cultural boundary and allow those middle ground people to be seen as normalized. It's all a part of that cultural shift and that cultural change. But I think it's more rooted, which route we take, kind of the conclusion of this process that you were talking about, Matt. I think it comes down more to personality and ontogeny and how you were raised and whether you're happy in life. I mean, really, it changes how you approach it.
All right, I'm going to go to the next clip. This may be the one that had the thing you wanted to respond to in it, Chelsea.
The basic idea behind cultural relativism is that because everyone is always judging a culture from their own particular situated cultural viewpoint, it's therefore impossible to make reliable judgments about other cultures and cultural practices. This means that cultures and cultural practices cannot be judged. For example, people in Brazil eat avocados with sugar and with sweet foods, like avocado smoothies. And in the United States, we eat avocados with salt and with salty foods, like guacamole. These are cultural practices and thus neither correct nor incorrect. The alleged inability to make reliable judgments about cultural practices has been illegitimately translated into a moral value. That is, the shift has been made from we cannot make judgments about cultural practices to we should not make judgments about cultural practices. Notice the spurious move here. From the impossibility of a rational critique of a cultural preference to the immorality of making a judgment about a cultural preference.
I remember what I was going to say before we move on. You talked about with Bill Reel in a previous episode about how the podcast downloads have gone down.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that, and there's so much more post-Mormon content out there now because I think there's just a bigger spectrum of people who have left the church that are into different things. And there isn't just the Mormon stories role, or people aren't getting their perspective just from John Delany anymore, or just from Infants on Thrones. You know, there's so much ex-Mormon content out there that people can kind of find their niche now, which is nice. It's not as well, if you hang out on Reddit too long, then it starts to get a little bubbly.
That was nice because everyone can develop the right role and develop their own sub-tribal rules within the broader tribe of ex-Mormonism. So we can continue to really ratchet down and have the one true way to do ex-Mormonism. And eventually, in 20 years,
I don't know how to not do
Sunstone.
It's
Sunstone. I have a bit I'm doing. In 20 years, there will be many ways to ex-Mormon. You have the Delanites over here. And that's what we're doing. This is a very small application of the same goddamn thing that we've been doing in Mormonism, and we're calling it different.
What do you mean by that?
Our roles are the same. We're doing the same. We are playing out our roles in the same dramas that are causing that have the same dysfunctional relationships, causing the same traumas to ourselves and other people. We're calling it different because it has just slightly different expressions. But we're still not meeting our needs, and we're not finding peace through ex-Mormonism because we're doing the same things, because it wasn't the church that was causing it. It wasn't that application. It was our fucking minds.
What are the roles? What are some of the roles?
Oh, well, tribalism is a good one. Religion, right? So moral relativism, charity. Here is the right way to do charity, and it's not that Mormon church, and I care a whole lot. I'm not paying my tithing, but I care a whole lot how you do charity, because here's the one true way to do charity, right? That's one way we're doing it. There's always looking at what other people are doing and saying, you're doing it wrong. This is the one true way. It's what homeboy, Jeffrey, whatever.
Jeremy Goff.
I was barely listening. I couldn't, his energy just sucks. But, you know, when he's talking about, you are telling the church what to do. Sam is, right? And ordained women were. And John Delany has. Yeah. Right. So that is what it is. It's at some point coming back and now looking at another group you're not a part of and saying, this is how you should live life. But I came from it and it affects me because my family and you guys do this to me, so I get to. But at some level, it's simply you looking at another person saying, this is how you do life.
Well, how are you supposed to advocate for anyone who is being traumatized by some system? I mean, take not just the church, but like the first people to push back on racist America. Like, how do you push back on dogma? You can't always just say, let's all just live and let live, because there are people who suffer that.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we pick. I think we criticize it. We do it, but we should be living differently, and we should be living more healthily. And the question all I have is are we? In whatever situation we're in, but particularly when you're talking about a life approach and we're essentially a cultural approach to living. The question is are we living in a way that's healthy? It's healthy for us. Body, mind, and spirit, right? Yes, we as people. And whatever that approach is, and this is what I'm saying, step back. Because Mormonism and ex-Mormonism is not unique. We think it is. We act like it is. What I'm saying is that approach bringing us health, is it bringing us happiness, whatever that means, is it meeting our needs? I'm suggesting that ex-Mormonism isn't. And part of the conflict that we have is because we are engaged in the same dysfunctions in ex-Mormonism, because the dysfunctions that were created in Mormonism didn't go away with the church. They permeated us, and they're manifested here. And in many ways, they're manifested in even a more unhealthy approach, because now we're adopting these very dangerous behaviors in some cases that we really we aren't culturally built for, because we weren't born into this culture.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I see what you're saying. Alcoholism comes to mind.
bad conversations, oversharing, boundary issues, not being able to feeling obligated the same way we did with Mormonism because for those same connections that really aren't real connections, but the only connections are that we're ex-Mormon. So consider that. How many associations
I've been there.
And interactions do you have with people simply because they're ex-Mormon? How many other relationships do you have outside, of other interests or other things you think about do based on things you don't have an affiliation to anymore? It's an absurd process if you think about it, but we do it. That's the dysfunction. That's the lack of intimacy. That's the lack of connection. This method for living life is the same, an application of the same dysfunction that we had nothing to do with. It was brought up in us.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, look at the dysfunction instead. Look at the way we interact interpersonally. Look at the way we interact with our spouses more than anything else, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Is ex-Mormonism, at least, are you seeing movement of continued health, wellness, and peace? Are your kids and your other associations, are those connections one that are feeding? Or does it feel that there's constant just angst, and why? I'm saying we're not looking at the symptom of what Mormonism caused because we're so caught up in the separation from the institution. And so we continue in these same rules or roles because that's all we know. That's all we know.
There's a phenomenon on Reddit particularly that once you stop describing yourself as ex-Mormon, you start describing yourself as post-Mormon, but it's still symptomatic of the same thing you're saying. Until you're describing yourself as what you are instead of what you aren't anymore, that seems like it would continue to pervade. And maybe that's a way to tell if you're on an upward slope. You're starting to describe yourself as something other than that.
Well, and once you describe yourself as something other than just Peter or Matt, you may just be in another tribe.
What if you describe yourself as awesome?
Well, that only worked for you, Tom. And handsome. Yeah.
I don't take issue with what you're saying. I don't disagree. But
it hurts, right? There's something about it that just feels uncomfortable.
Well, no, it's more like, I guess all those things that I agree with you about the ex-Mormon community, post-Mormon community. Maybe I need to reflect on my life more, but I feel like not everybody who has left the church falls under that umbrella and is healthier.
I hope so.
So can you say you're an ex-Mormon without people assuming that you're an alcoholic, that you share too much, that you don't, have right boundaries? Do you have to assimilate that baggage because you are an ex-Mormon?
Well, once you just talk about assimilating baggage, then I think you've got baggage that needs to be put away, and you're in the same dysfunction that's going on. That's what I'm talking about. And I'm not suggesting this is a monolith, and I'm not suggesting this is 100% on anything I said, just like, as I said, as of the dominance piece. I'm not saying every single person reacts that way because they're insecure. I'm saying there is a large enough people where that will resonate with, and that is a motivator, and I think an awareness of that is important. Similarly here, the issue is real to many people. To those who it's not, something that I told the missionaries that came by, I said, I hope that whatever your approach is, if Mormonism is the right approach to health and wellness, then I want you to continue on that path. But I hope it's the path that is right for you because it's right for you, not because it's the only tribe you've ever known. And I say the same thing to ex-Mormons. If truly this path of ex-Mormonism is bringing you that health, wellness, and peace, continue on that path because only you can decide what that path is for you. But are you on this path simply because it's the only other tribe you've ever known and that the alternative is too frightening? Consider that option, because when we're in water, water's wet. And if that's all you've known, how do you know that you're wet or dry? You're always wet. So I say spend some time in seeing, is whatever environment I'm in, is that the environment that is particularly healthy to Matt? Is Matt able to be the true version of Matt because of this environment? And is Matt able to give a real and authentic expressions of love to the people that he loves in this environment? Or is there something about this environment that forces Matt to feel that he can't be vulnerable and authentic to certain people and therefore not be the true self? If that's the case, I suggest adjust the environment somewhat. And I'm saying we don't spend time thinking in that because we're spending so much time worrying about the other side and where they decide to give charity and how they decide to give charity and other things that, in criticizing the church on principles, I think we are evaluating our own values. And it's fair and it's good and it's healthy to do that to the extent that there's application inward. But too often, the criticism of the church only results in a requested application for an external response. And I'm saying do the other, because you have the ability to affect change within yourself and adjust your environment more than you do in affecting change externally.
All right. So let me, I'm going to try to pull my head out of the water for a minute. So we all have blind spots, right? Whether we were believers or not. And then when we become unbelievers, we still got blind spots. They're just different, right? And other people still have blind spots. And sometimes we can see other people's blind spots. Maybe other people can see our blind spots. And some of these blind spots are cultural, religious based, or, stuff that came from our childhood, whatever they are. Right. So isn't like the bigger, broader picture that I even think that Peter Bahorgian, I think if we just keep butchering his last name, that'll be good. But isn't the broader picture that we're just trying to find ways effectively to reach other people with blind spots? Like if we see someone with a blind spot, isn't one of our, things that we should be wanting to do is reach
roles.
One of our roles is to reach them and say, hey, I don't know if you know this, but you're not seeing this. And I'm seeing this. I'm seeing that you're missing seeing this.
Well, we had a very serendipitous weekend where my wife and I had a good coming together and kind of working on some issues in our relationship as we try to work on them regularly. And our son ended up ending his first relationship. He's in college, and his boyfriend broke up with him, and we had to receive him in a state of grief and pain. And it was unique for us as parents of adult children, now kind of dealing with adult issues and adult emotions. And we see his blind spots. And rather than talking to him about the blind spots, instead, all we could say is, we love you. It hurts. We know. And we loved on him. And we just built him up and talked about all the good qualities, knowing the blind spot that we knew is in this moment, he is as insecure and as crushed and as broken as he'll ever be. All he sees is all the negatives and why he doesn't deserve love and why he will never find love. That's the blind spot that he doesn't have, that I have, knowing that and knowing that's not real. So rather than giving him the perspective, understanding that, it was, son, the only thing you need to know is that I love you and that this is who you are really, because right now you are creating a fiction of yourself. And I gave him the reality of how I see him because I wanted him to see him the way I see him, not the way he sees himself in that moment. So that was a way, I think, of identifying the blind spot and letting him come to the conclusion on his own, because this is a process, this is a moment that will change and it will adjust. And hopefully that's the way we approach the blind spot in that specific situation.
Right. And there's so many other situations.
Or I could say, now, Tommy, you got to understand, I've lived a long time. I've seen some shit, bro. Well, let me tell you how life works. Suck it up. Everybody has a bad relationship. You're going to get over it. You're going to have another one. Let me tell you how it is, man, because I'm your father. I've seen it. That's what we do in trying to reveal blind spots. And in doing that, we demonstrate our own blind spots because we don't have their perspective. But perhaps we have a particular shared perspective of feeling like nobody will love us ever again for a day or a month or sometimes for a lifetime. That's the blind spot in seeing in other people so that we can help them see that blind spot in that blind spot in themselves so we can see it in ourselves when it happens to us.
Are we done with the clips, Glenn?
No, I mean, we can be. I'm trying to think of a way to bring it back to cultural relativism.
I mean, yeah, just take that hard right turn, probably.
And it's all cultural relativism. I'm just blowing this thing up. I'm on a different path than anyone else, huh?
I don't know about that. I think you're bringing some pretty heavy stuff in, at least for me.
Well, maybe we should stop fucking talking around the issue and talk about the issue. And that's a goddamn problem with Bogosian. Every time I heard his clip, I'm, what the fuck are you talking about?
What?
I can say something, man. Let's talk about the issues, not around the issues.
You don't think he's talking about the issues?
No, because I think, again, we have to get in very clear specifics and very conversations with very specific people, because one of the problems that he's talking about relativism is all these data points. Before we talk about how to have this approach, I better know who that person is across from me, what their experience is, what are the complexities in their life, what are the things in the moment that they're dealing with right now today. Did they just not sleep? Did they just have one of the worst blow-ups with their kid? Is their kid suicidal? We act as if people, how about this? We have yet to interact with the real people that we interact with. They're all fictions in our heads because we don't take a minute to find out, and we'll never know what are all those factors. So I'm saying with Bogosian, it's an uninteresting conversation to have, and it's like saying, do you believe in God? It's a stupid conversation. Because before you start bridging these gaps, we have to hit these variables and get into specifics. And that's where I find this. That's why I keep stepping out, because I don't know how to apply it the way that Bogosian's presenting it. What I know is the way that I've dealt with it over the course of the last 10 years. And each conversation is uniquely different because of all those variables as to who the person is, all those things that come in. That's what I'm saying.
I completely agree. I think that what he's fundamentally missing, and I'm sure he's going to think, who's this chick like telling me I'm wrong? Maybe that's overstepping with some hubris. But I think his major flaw in his entire argument is that relativism can be pulled out of context, and that's just implausible and impossible. I mean, Einstein's theory of relativity, it's the way we learned about it in school. There's a guy on a train and a guy on a platform, a light gets put on to the guy on the train. Oh, all the lights came out at the same time. To the guy on the platform, because of time, speed, light, right? It looks like it comes off at different times. So where you are standing determines the truth or the reality of that experience. And that's how Einstein always meant the theory of relativity. Now, Franz Boas, who came up with cultural relativity, he didn't coin it, but he was kind of the first one to start talking about it. Sorry, we got a chat. So let me rephrase that state. Sorry, Glenn. So Einstein always meant for relativism to have a context, to have a point of view, to have a place, a stake in the ground. And that's how Boas with cultural relativism also believed. So it's not the impossibility or the implausibility of understanding another culture per se. It's that what culture you're in determines the applications, the conclusions, the rightness, the morality, the value system, whether it's good or bad. One of my favorite 101 examples, and I told you, Glenn, I was going to show you this little book called Morality and Moral Controversies, Readings in Moral, Social, and Political Philosophy. And I always have my students read this one chapter because it just struck a chord with me as a young Mormon girl. And it's about one culture who burns their dead and one culture who eats a piece of their dead to really take it upon themselves. And the first time I read that, I thought, oh my God, how gross. How could you eat a dead person? Right. And the entire dialogue, the whole article is weighing how strange it is to think about eating someone that's dead. And then the same culture being thrust into the other, thinking why would you turn to trash the most valuable thing of the last moment I will ever have with this person. I want it to become a part of me. And then I realized, oh my gosh, in my religion, we're the people who hate Christ. We believe in taking him upon us, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in that culture if we're really thinking about epistemological lineages. And it really, and it gets my students to understand that burning or eating the flesh of your dead are only right or wrong if you step outside the context, right? And I think that's what he's fundamentally missing. And in cultural relativism, I mean, can we all agree that avocado example was super dumb?
Yeah, really dumb.
Come on. It wasn't even culture. Anyway.
Do you want to go through some case studies? Because, like this case study that you have, that you gave here of like the eating, the burning, the dead, Jonathan Haidt proposes some of these. These are our next set of clips if you want to play some and see where we go with the conversation.
I would love to. I think I only had one last thing.
All right, go ahead.
Cultural relativism is just the idea, because everything is in context. It was not that you can't understand another culture. It's that you can only judge someone's behavior within the context of that culture.
And all of the multiple variables.
Yes.
Say that again. There's a lot there. You have a really good, you're hitting something deep with with the line. I want to hear that again.
And just so that we're all aware, because people don't really know about anthropology, they don't really think we're that important, but this is how we have to take ethical codes. We can get disbarred, basically. We can be kicked out of anthropology if we do not approach culture the right way. We take it very seriously. And the definition of cultural relativism for us, for anthropologists, who this is our whole profession, is that you cannot judge someone outside of the context of their culture. However, within one's own culture, you can determine and judge behavior. And that's how each culture has created a series of laws and systems of morality. And so it's that mixing of context, that taking out of context, that I just fundamentally think he's mistaken.
I got to spend some time with that. So thank you for that, Chelsea.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between judging someone or something like an individual point within a culture versus judging a culture? Are those different things?
I think so. What do you guys think?
Well, yeah, they're different things. Yeah, and I think that goes back to one of the clips, one of the points that he made earlier, that criticizing processes or systems is different than criticizing people or groups. Is that what you're asking, Peter?
Yeah, the idea that we can say somebody who does some certain behavior in a certain culture is morally reprehensible, but we find out later that they were coerced into it. So we can judge the idea that it's bad to coerce somebody to do something that's immoral, but we can't necessarily judge a person who did a thing that was bad because they were coerced into it. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. But I also think you can judge an idea, you can judge a culture, but you can also judge a person. And I think those are three separate ideas. However, I don't think you can ever judge an idea outside of the context of that person. So if we really get into ontogeny, epigenetics, connectomics, how our brains work, what we're born with, what our life, imprints on the plasticity of our brain, even a passionate, if you truly believe an idea and someone critiques it, I do not believe you can separate idea from person. Because what has constructed that mindset and the passion behind an idea and that belief, if you will, not just a tangential idea like the earth is round, but maybe something you fundamentally believe in and have passion around, that's built for a reason. You've built that emotion around that for a reason, so you can't critique that without that pain coming back upon you, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's listen to this next series of examples and see where the discussion takes us. And then, I know we've been doing this for 2 hours, so if anybody at any point feels like I'm done, we got to jump off, we can do that. But I'm curious to see your responses to this.
I'm going to tell you a brief story. Pause after you hear it and decide whether the people in the story did anything morally wrong. A family's dog was killed by a car in front of their house. They had heard that dog meat was delicious, so they cut up the dog's body and cooked it and ate it for dinner. Nobody saw them do this.
All right. Tom, was it wrong?
Morally or culturally?
In any way was what happened wrong? Or maybe, Chelsea, you could talk about what questions would we need to ask, what context would we have to surround ourselves with in order to determine if it was wrong or not.
So I would need to know. I would need to know if they're in Wisconsin or Southeast Asia. And if I knew the difference between that, it would determine whether people in their neighborhood would think that it's wrong.
Mm-hmm. What about just you as an observer thinking that it's morally wrong for you?
No, because we live in a society where we believe that cutting up and eating animals is acceptable. So I don't see a difference between a cow and a dog and a horse. And a monkey and a rat. In Ghana, we ate grass cutter, which is a large rat. So really what you think is gross is completely culturally dependent. Mm-hmm. Morally, it depends on if you believe animals suffer and die. And if you believe they suffer and die, then yeah, that you murdered something. It just happened to be a different species.
No, it got hit by a car.
Oh, then yeah, eat it. Why not?
What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I'm with Chelsea.
No big deal?
No big deal.
Matt?
What? Can I eat an animal?
No, do you think that example was that there was something morally wrong, or is it's all good? Or is it just uninteresting?
I had to walk away for a minute. I only have one kidney, so I had to take a break.
Okay. All right. Let's Jonathan Haidt will explain his answer here.
If you were like most of the well-educated people in my studies, you felt an initial flash of disgust, but you hesitated before saying the family had done anything morally wrong. After all, the dog was dead already, so they didn't hurt it, right? And it was their dog, so they had a right to do what they wanted with the carcass, no? If I pushed you to make a judgment, odds you'd give me a nuanced answer. Something like, well, I think it's disgusting, and I think they should have just buried the dog, but I wouldn't say it was morally wrong. Okay, here's a more challenging story. A man goes to the supermarket once a week and buys a chicken. But before cooking the chicken, he has sexual intercourse with it. Then he cooks it and eats it.
You can't touch this. You can't touch this.
I want to start with Tom again.
As long as he's not doing it in front of anybody, he's not like videotaping it and whatever. Like if he's doing it in the confines of his own room, I guess I'm like, to each their own, I guess.
All right. Matt?
I don't have an opinion on that.
You don't have an opinion on that if it's moral or not?
I don't.
Okay. Chelsea?
Oh, God. Is it dead or alive? I can't remember.
So it would make a difference if the chicken was...
It makes a total difference to me on chicken rape if it was dead or alive.
I like these gradations.
Yeah. Is it chicken rape?
I told you I was going to answer these all wrong. If the chicken's dead and he just has this weird sexual fetish, I'm with Tom. Like, as long as he's not exposing anyone to it and it just gets him off, like, whatever. I think it's gross, but like, who cares? If the chicken's alive and there's no consent, that's my argument against bestiality.
How would you determine consent from a chicken?
That's what I mean. It's impossible. It's impossible. Therefore, I consider it rape. In non-consensual sex, I don't care who it's with. It's rape, even if it's an animal. That animal feels pain.
Yeah.
So
in Arizona,
that's horrible.
In Arizona, it is illegal to have sex with a chicken. There was a case where
no, stop.
But they didn't know what to do with the They didn't know what to do with the chicken, so they gave it back to the guy.
I don't want to hear about a case with this happening.
The chicken was alive, man?
The chicken was alive, and they gave it back to the guy. So I like to imagine like Gonzo's chicken just going.
You know what? I was supposed to sleep tonight. No, whatever. It's off now.
Here's another fun fact.
No,
this is a fun fact.
All right,
fish are on the table. Fish are all good in Arizona. That's the one.
Oh, come on. All right, move on. Jeez.
All right.
Once again, no harm, nobody else knows, and like the dog-eating family, it involves a kind of recycling that is, as some of my research subjects pointed out, an efficient use of natural resources. But now the disgust is so much stronger, and the action just seems so degrading. Does that make it wrong? If you're an educated and politically liberal Westerner, you'll probably give another nuanced answer, one that acknowledges the man's right to do what he wants, as long as he doesn't hurt anyone. But if you are not a liberal or libertarian Westerner, you probably think it's wrong, morally wrong, for someone to have sex with a chicken carcass and then eat it. For you, as for most people on the planet, Morality is broad. Some actions are wrong, even though they don't hurt anyone. Understanding the simple fact that morality differs around the world, and even within societies, is the first step toward understanding your righteous mind. The next step is to understand where these many moralities came from in the first place.
All right, so you're not actually going to play the incest example, are you?
I have it queued up in the next one.
Julie and Mark, who are sister and brother, are traveling together in France. They are both on summer vacation from college. One night, they're staying alone in a cabin near the beach. They decide that it would be interesting and fun if they tried making love. At the very least, it would be a new experience for each of them. Julie is already taking birth control pills, but Mark uses a condom too, just to be safe. They both enjoy it, but they decide not to do it again. They keep that night as a special secret between them, which makes them feel even closer to each other. So what do you think about this? Was it wrong for them to have sex? In the other harmless taboo story, Jennifer works in a hospital pathology lab. She's a vegetarian for moral reasons. She thinks it's wrong to kill animals. But one night, she has to incinerate a fresh human cadaver, and she thinks it's a waste to throw away perfectly edible flesh. So she cuts off a piece of flesh and takes it home. Then she cooks it and eats it. We knew these stories were disgusting, and we expected that they'd trigger immediate moral condemnation. Only 20% of subjects said it was okay for Julie and Mark to have sex, and only 13% said it was okay for Jennifer to eat part of a cadaver. But when Scott asked people to explain their judgments and then challenged those judgments, he found exactly the Humean pattern that we had predicted. In these harmless taboo scenarios, people generated far more reasons and discarded far more reasons than in any of the other scenarios. They seemed to be flailing around, throwing out reason after reason, and rarely changing their minds when Scott proved that their latest reason was not relevant. Here's the transcript of one interview about the incest story. Experimenter. So what do you think about this? Was it wrong for Julie and Mark to have sex? Yeah, I think it's totally wrong to have sex. Because I'm pretty religious, and I just think incest is wrong anyway. But I don't know. What's wrong with incest, would you say? The whole idea of, I've heard, I don't even know if this is true, but in the case, if the girl did get pregnant, the kids become deformed most of the time in cases like that. But they used a condom and birth control pills. Oh, okay, yeah, you did say that. So there's no way they're going to have a kid. Well, I guess the safest sex is abstinence, but I don't know. I just think that's wrong. I don't know. What did you ask me? Was it wrong for them to have sex? Yeah, I think it's wrong. And I'm trying to find out why, what you think is wrong with it. Okay, well, let's see. Let me think about this. How old were they? They were college age, around 20 or so. Oh. I don't know. It's not something you're brought up to do. It's just not, I wasn't. I assume most people aren't. I think that you shouldn't, I guess my reason is just that you're not brought up to do it. You don't see it. It's not, I don't think it's accepted. That's pretty much it. You wouldn't say that anything you're not brought up to see is wrong, would you? For example, if you're not brought up to see women working outside the home, would you say that makes it wrong for women to work? Oh gosh, this is hard. There's just no way I could change my mind, but I just don't know how to show what I'm feeling, what I feel about it. It's crazy. In this transcript, and in many others, it's obvious that people were making up a moral judgment immediately and emotionally. Reasoning was merely the servant of the passions, and when the servant failed to find any good arguments, the master did not change his mind. We quantified some of the behaviors that seemed most indicative of being morally dumbfounded, and these analyses showed big differences between the way people responded to the harmless taboo scenarios compared to the Heinz dilemma.
I don't know, man. I've read this book and I've heard this example used a couple times, and I don't know, man. That pushes me in all kinds of ugly areas.
Well, but why is that a bad thing though? Because then you can definitely go, oh yeah, that's immoral.
Because it's not clear. It's not. Man. Whatever.
What it illustrates though is to me, and we talked about this earlier, is that you get an emotional response from hearing these stories, and you make a judgment based on that emotional response, and then you have to explain why. You give some reason and rationale why it's wrong.
Okay.
So I think it ties in with moral relativity and cultural relativity. I don't know. I wish the guy that had accused us of being moral relativists or cultural relativists or whatever was on here, or he gave us some specific examples that we could respond to. But I think it's I don't know. I don't even know how interesting it is anymore.
I say, can I give you a cultural example that is true to life? I might have already told you this one, but that doesn't bring up so much triggering stuff. So I was once working in the field. I was working with witch doctors, kind of learning how they heal, traveling, living with them, and kind of, going to the shrine. And I got to know these young girls who I found out had been accused of witchcraft. They were 13 and 14. And I won't give you their names or the village, but there's a practice where kind of parents give their kids to these healers to kind of get them better, to get the witchcraft out of them. But in the meantime, they're his slaves and they've been sexually abused. And, I really felt as an American woman, very I need to protect these girls. And we were at a ceremony, and part of the ceremony to kind of get the witchcraft out is he grabs a piece of tire, a rubber tire, and he's spinning around. And I've been to, at this point, hundreds of spirit possessions. So even though I'm a young Mormon girl, I had become acclimatized, right? I had understand the culture enough of what's happening culturally at the moment, but I'd never seen this level of intensity. And he begins to beat the girls with this wire, and you could hear the way rubber, could hear the sound and see the welt the instant, and they were crying with big tears in their eyes. And I, as the first time as an anthropologist, was like, I need to stop it. It's like walking up in sacrament meeting in front of everyone. This is a ritual. I'm not a part of it. These are not my people. These are not my practices. But as an American, I can't morally sit back and watch these girls. I know they're getting abused logically, but now I'm watching it physically.
Yeah.
And just because these people believe in this thing, I believe girls should not be abused, right? And I had this huge moral quandary. And it's a really interesting story. I ended up just getting up and leaving. I just couldn't stand the beating, right? But I felt like I couldn't, take down the ceremony. So I just kind of got out and left. And that was kind of offensive, but not as offensive as it would have been if I stopped the ceremony. And then I met with these girls later, and they said, I'll try to hurry it along, but they said, come back next time and make sure they don't beat us. Because I had come to the healer, and said, hey, I felt sorry I left early. I felt uncomfortable in my culture. This is just not acceptable. He's like, well, this is why I'm doing it. He explained the ritual again and the witchcraft. I'm like, I get it. Logically, I wrote down all his, explanatory models, but I still don't want to watch girls be beaten. And so he and I came to an agreement of, when I'm at the ceremony, he won't beat the girls, which I don't know. Is that moral? I don't know. So the next time I'm there, please stay, Chelsea. He's going to beat me. So I start going to these ceremonies in order for him not to beat these girls. I don't know if that's moral, if I'm breaking some kind of anthropological code. And then the finale of this story is, one time I'm there and their parents come, and these girls cannot go home to their parents unless it's proven that this witchcraft is out of them. And the same girls that begged me, 2 weeks ago to stay, she now comes up to me and says, can you please leave? If you're here, he won't beat me, and then my family won't take me back. And so then I was walking away in order for her to get beaten, in order for her to go to her family. And in that whole story, I'm still trying to figure out what was right, what was wrong, who's correct. And that's the mess of cultural and moral relativism, I think, is I still don't know.
Well, so I love the example, and I remembered what I love is hearing a lot of these things that we're covering 4 years later, and so I'm hearing them with new eyes, with new perspective. And I remember this example, or anyway, rather than explain it, I'll just say, to me, there's a couple things at play that I went to. The first was as it relates to harm. And to me, that's the principle that I talked about of processes or conclusions and the application of that. In this case, the application is through the process, and the conclusion is this girl gets beat. To me, that application, which is harm, is moral. So now I can make a statement, that bad. Not long declares it, bad. But then it becomes, so fucking what? Now what? And now you get into the complexity of Chelsea's morality. What does she do about it as, in that context, as a powerless person? And now we that's a complicated discussion, because that ultimately is the discussion we have every day. at what point do we have the duty, the ability, the right, the whatever to now affect change or intervene because of our moral belief? I think what you described, if what I heard about that ritual or whatever, is pretty similar to the Sam Young situation, but actually a lot more severe because the actual very, very observable harm is apparent, whereas so much of what the harm caused in the Sam Young is perspective, or there's some subjectivity to it. It's some of there in many cases there isn't harm. It's not ubiquitous. Whereas beating somebody with a tool, with an instrument, is harm. So I think that's a really good example. But let's get into the weeds. Okay, great. Once I declare something immoral, so what? What is the application of that declaration of immorality? And that's a complicated question. It's a great example.
So in your opinions, I mean, I'd be really interested. Was I right? Was I wrong? What would you have done?
To me, it's easy. It's a position of power. If I do not have the ability to intervene because of my role, my necessary role, then that's moral, because I have no choice. But if I have the ability to intervene and choose not to because of my role, and I have the power to do that, now that's an immoral question. So to me, that's I think it speaks very highly to your ability to feel real empathy for other people. But what else do you do? We know wrongs go around all over the place. Do we just, well, I'm going to now go here because I have heard about this thing going on at this corner, and so I am going and intervene because I believe it wrong. So,
but also, if I was actually wrong. The end of my story is I should have just backed off, because the only way to get out of that guy's compound, the only way to be a full human again, the only way to have the life she wanted was to get beaten. My own morality was preventing her from the healing process, even though I didn't agree with the process, that would allow her to have a full and happy life. And I was preventing that. And it took me a lot of time to realize that my own outrage, and I think it was Glenn saying, that emotion of seeing this thing that I think is ethically wrong and tampering that down enough to see what was right for her life and what would give her the best life. And I was, it took me forever to kind of weigh those things out.
And see, so my critique is the manner in which you took up that much space in that scenario in any way, shape, or form. Your entire story is a story of you taking up space that you had no place taking up.
Yes.
So we're in agreement. Yeah. But I think that comes from such a good place. And what a complicated situation that is, to put another human being interacting and observing other human beings. That's eye-opening to me.
All right. Well, we've got people dropping off, so I think we're good to wrap up. Are there I don't know if I came out of this understanding moral relativism and cultural relativism and epistemological relativism really any better, like I thought that we would at the beginning. I think this is going to be one of those conversations that I listen back to and I get more hearing it back the second time than when I'm in it. But yeah, I'm not quite sure what to do with it at this point.
Yeah, maybe there's something in there.
I think there was so one of the things that I was thinking about through these clips and talking about moral relativism, this may not be anything, but the thought I have is how this approach and the criticism to relativism, and especially because it's difficult to really understand what that means, provides too much cover for people to not be relativists in areas that they ought to be. And one of the areas I was thinking about was love. Mm-hmm. Is that instead we're not relativists. We say, this is the way I will express love, and you will accept the way I express love. And if we can't agree on that, well, this is objective because this is love. And then too often we require other people to express love in the way we choose them to do it, rather than being relative and acknowledging that expression of love is different than the way I express love. That's a different process. But if the conclusion is healthy and it's elevating and it's connecting, we need to acknowledge that and be aware of that and be open to those things, both receiving and giving. Here again, relativism. Too often we look at expressions and only worry about the intent. And so then we start calling things like abuse love and manipulation love and codependency love and these things. So to me, the first part was the first line was better, is that we are not relativists in areas where it's incumbent on us to be.
Maybe in that space is maybe the ideal outcome of this, because my biggest criticism, I think, of Boghossian throughout all of this is he thinks he knows everything he needs to know. He thinks he's right. He absolutely believes in what he's saying. And that idea of, I don't know, which used to be terrifying for me, is one of the most uplifting, beautiful things that I think I've gotten out of the last few years of my experience. That space of, I don't know. And so every single interaction that I have with somebody that may have this kind of context is wonderful and nuanced. And I'm paying attention to individual experiences more than I would have otherwise if I was discounting things because I knew what the right answer was.
Yeah, good point.
So I'm taking it again in a weird way, but I think it's because as I kind of worked my way out of Mormonism, through anthropology, the cultural relativism, seeing witch doctors could not make sense in my Mormon worldview, right? So I had to expand in order to be ethical. And I think kind of that route of taking me out of the church made it so I'm so relativistic that as a human, I think I'm a better person. I think I'm kinder. I'm glad I'm relativistic. But as a scientist, it drives me crazy. I'm a little like Matt in the way that I want to analyze every single variable that leads up to a decision or an outcome. I want to be able to predict these things. I want to be able to talk about, well, why is it that some people act this way and not this way? And well, why is it, how do you tell someone? How do you get someone out of something? And we're just not there yet. And I think that's kind of how I want to kind of end is, as a scientist, people don't understand how close to the tip of the iceberg we are on human social behaviors and biology and interactions. And, Talcott Parsons in like the 1950s, if I'm thinking correctly, over at Harvard, 1970s maybe, he created this department that was supposed to do that. It was supposed to create all the social sciences and kind of understand humans not in these parsed apart way, but in these, oh my God, every single interaction, whether it's, hey, how are you? Which, if you look at it linguistically, is not even asking the question we're trying to answer, right? And the response, if you're really analyzing every single variable of human behavior, it's so complicated and we're just not even close. And that, of course, that department got disbanded. No one really could figure it out. And we're all just like, touching our little tiny piece of the big elephant trying to explain the world. And so for me, why relativism drives us so crazy is because it's so rooted in such complicated, entangled webs of significance that is culture and religion and morality and your upbringing and your biology and, what books you read and your education and the language you speak, that we just can't parse it apart, and it drives us crazy. And I think that's why philosophers try and everyone tries to one up each other. But really, it always comes down to the same dialogue, right?
So do we have a landing place? We agree how complicated it is.
Yeah, so let's continue to try to learn as much as we can about the world by questioning our own perception and understanding that our perspective is incredibly limited. So let's connect with other people to try to enlarge our perspective. And one thing that you said last week, I want to just touch on real quick, or in one of our conversations recently about, to gain that perspective is finding those people, not unlike the studies that I was talking about, that the process that proved to be reliable and replicatable. Find those people who have been that in your life to be those check-ins, to assist with the perspective. I think of the different people in my life that I like to call and say, I want to make sure I'm not missing something about life that is critical to this particular decision, especially issues of children and other people, those relationships that matter, is to have those as well. And rather than adopting a tribe, adopting people who are at least have access to the complexity of your life and the complexity of other beings in your life, to be that check-in so that you don't have to just rely on yourself.
I think you said one really brilliant thing just now that we need to emphasize, which I actually think is a more interesting question than this whole moral relativism, cultural relativism debate, which is, why is it that some of us are open to being wrong and some of us just are not?
Right.
I think, to me, that is so fascinating. I don't have an answer. I'm just curious. And all I can tell people is, having left the church, I'm happier. Life is better. I'm kinder because I'm open to being incorrect. And that's really why I like science. I'm a total atheist, but I'm a big believer in science. And my partner and I have decided to raise our kid in like the God of science. Figure out how to eat. Let's look at the science. Figure out how much exercise to do. Let's look at the science. Figure out how to interact with other humans. Let's look at science. Let's learn from each other. Always be open. And science is always be open to being fallible and learning and growing. And I think that's why the people I love the most are open to failing and learning and growing. And the ecclesiastical, I said the wrong thing. Epistemological. Sorry, we're all having troubles here.
I hate the word.
That would be a totally different argument if I was saying the ecclesiastical. The epistemological mindset that I most get behind is science, because you're allowed to have evidence and you're allowed to be wrong and learn from being wrong and continue to build on that. And that's what relativism gave me, is it made me have a better life and be kinder, and it made me have a system I can believe in, which is quite a lot to get from something that none of us can even define.
Hi, this is Brian. I'm from Utah, California, Arizona, Georgia, Kentucky, and Nevada. I've moved 29 times, a sort of middle finger to stability in life planning. I'm sure it has nothing to do with my anxiety. Probably. You can comment on this episode at infantsonthrones.com. If you like what you hear, give this hallowed quorum a 5-star rating and write a short review on iTunes. I obeyed. Anyone for the closing prayer?
There doesn't seem to be anybody else who agrees with me. Do you believe what you say? Motionless sweet, nothing is real. Wasting my time in the waiting line. Do you believe in what you say?
I genuinely think, to me, that's a sign of something I had to learn on my steps of being a grown-ass adult who's not an asshole, is whose responsibility really do I have, right? And it's my kids. If they're assholes, if they're entitled, if they're jerks, if they're unkind, if they're bullies, if they turn out to be like Trump, I have failed and I have hurt society. But other than my kids, it's not my job to control or manage. And that has been something, I've had grandmothers who are loving and grandmothers who try to control. It's night and day who's happy. It's night and day who's healthy, who has great social relationships. And even in my siblings, who have all taken a different path, all 8 of us on the church, we just have all had to realize it's not our job to control. Our only job in the world with 90% of people we meet is to love and to understand. And how fucking cool is that? And why did it take us so long to figure that out?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a message that you would get in church. Right? Doesn't it?
Yeah. We didn't, though. We were told to always give a Book of Mormon on the fucking plane, and it was so awkward. I hated doing that.
But we were told that was how you show love. It's all about Jesus said love everyone, and this is how you do it. And if you do it any different way, then it's not legit, doesn't work. Yeah, I don't know.
Saying different things to me, different things to me. Everyone's saying different things to me, different things to me. Everyone's saying different things to me, different things to me. Everyone's saying different things to me, nothing is real. Everyone's wasting my time, different things to me. on thrones.